This What's Working with Cam Marston podcast is brought to you courtesy of First Horizon Bank.
Hi, I'm Tabitha Scott, a human dynamics expert and the host of Bucket Listening, brought to you by First Horizon Bank. I hope you will join me as I sit down with people from all walks of life to learn how their passions, insights, and persistence have helped them turn their bucket list into a beautiful life.
Tune in on your preferred platform or visit firsthorizon.com/podcast.
Welcome to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. Thank you so much for joining us for today's show. Gonna have yet another good one. It has never been that we've begun a show and I've said this is going to be a bad one. So I'm keeping the trend up. It's going to be a good one. I'll tell you more about it in just 1 minute, and we'll have our guests on a Zoom call here in a moment. What's Working, if you're new, is about workplace, workforce, and marketplace trends. I find the guests that can talk about the trends and explain it to us in such a way that we can do something about it or we can understand it in a new way. One of the trends I've been receiving a lot of inquiries recently on, and I kind of thought this trend had passed, is how do we get our people to come back to work? How do we get them to want to work in the office again? And my thought on this was that, hey, it's the work from home world existed for a while, all due to COVID, but that time is over. It's time to come back to work. It will be a more flexible workplace in the future as parents can leave and are granted their wishes to leave to go participate in kids' events or care for a sick child or care for a sick parent. We should have a show on caring for aging parents versus caring for sick children. I have read some people who have aging parents and need to leave the workday in order to care for their parents feel like they're being discriminated against or looked down upon for having to do so, whereas parents of young children are forgiven and, in fact, are given blessings for standing up and leaving their workplace for caring for their young children. It's not the same for sick parents. We should talk about that. And based on what I've seen on the demographics, our population is aging rapidly, and this 80 million baby boomer population, huge numbers, biggest generation, with the exception of the millennials, biggest generation will certainly begin and continue to need care from their children. Anyway, how do we structure a workplace around that? Back to what I started talking about. I got a request week before, for a bank out of New York City saying, hey, Cam, how about a webinar on how we can get our people to want to return to work? And I'm not sure if there is a way to get people who have been working from home and gotten used to working from home and have found benefit to want to return to work. There was a lot of conversation about loneliness epidemics, and people are getting lonely and realizing the workplace is where that loneliness can be defeated. But still, apparently, there are many organizations who are made threats, made promises, made offers, dangled carrots, carried sticks, etc., to get people to want to come back into their workplace and work where they can share ideas, where employers can reliably know that their peer and their colleague will be there in order to collaborate with them. Apparently, it's still a big problem. So anybody that's got insights into back to work and wishes to share them or a resource on that nature, please forward them along. Cam@cammarston.com. Let's get some of the newest ideas on this show of what it's taking to get people to return to the workplace. We don't need a diagnosis anymore. We need solution. So let me know what you think about that, as well as anybody that you know that might have an insight in new policies around aging parents. I think that's definitely a trend that this show needs to examine, and how workplaces are structuring employees' opportunities to care for aging parents. Certainly there's some new thought out there on that with the population aging the way it is. Anyway, let me tell you what we're going to get when we come back from break. Shashank Rao, and I will confirm the pronunciation of that after I get him on the Zoom call, is with the Harbert School of Business in Auburn. And I reached out to my contact there and said, hey, I'm really interested in AI and how it's impacting specific industries. And he said, I got the guy for you. So he is faculty and staff. Let's see. He's a PhD from University of Kentucky, supply chain management and artificial intelligence. We'll have Shashank on the line when we come back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. We will be right back with, I think, what is going to be the first of many artificial intelligence conversations that will be on this show in the near future.
This is Seth Cherniak, Vice President of Branch Development for the Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group. If you're an experienced financial advisor wanting the freedom of independence but aren't sure making that jump is right for you, we should talk. Jeffrey Matthews has developed a successful program for advisors who don't want to be 1099 contractors and don't want to pay for their own overhead. We're looking for advisors who want the freedom to run their business the way they see fit, with the support that comes with a W-2 firm. If you're interested in joining one of our branches, or if you want to open your own branch as a full-time employee, let's chat. Our compensation plan is one of the most competitive among all W-2 firms, big or small. Reach out to us today at jeffreymatthews.com. Connect with me, Seth Cherniak, on LinkedIn, or click the link in the podcast.
Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group, member FINRA, SIPC. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. On a Zoom call for me from the campus of Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama, is Shashank Rao. He is the Jim W. Thompson Professor in the Department of Supply Chain Management at Auburn University. He's got a PhD from the University of Kentucky circa 2009 and has been highly recommended as the guy that can talk about the application of artificial intelligence to supply chain, and perhaps most importantly for each of us, what does it mean to you and me? Shashank has a number of different accolades here in front of me in his bio. He held a faculty appointment at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, holds a bachelor's in environmental engineering, an MBA in marketing and finance, and a doctorate in operations and supply chain management. I'll pick and choose from his bio as we go through this, as well as some of his customer engagements. Fairly impressive. Shashank, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to What's Working. Happy to have you.
Well, thanks so much for the opportunity, Cam. Really glad to be here.
Your Harbert School has provided us with a number of great guests that can identify the trends going on. I think artificial intelligence is going to be a conversation I'll be having at least for the next 5 years of its implications in our society today. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your focus of study, and then we'll get into what it means to me and my listeners.
Well, excellent. Yeah. So thanks for that question. So, really, I've been at Auburn for about 13 years or so, and really almost everything that I've worked on while I've been here can largely fall into the general area of technology and supply chain. Yeah. So, AI is a big part of that, obviously, at this point. But it really started out with, looking at things that go into successful AI and successful artificial intelligence, including, data collection and data gathering through, auto ID systems and things like that, and now has morphed into, the AI space and things surrounding that.
So give me a background. My suspicion is that supply chain management, supply chain development, et cetera, has taken significant steps forward due to the technologies that we've seen introduced to the marketplace. Give me a sense of where it's been. Let's go into the Wayback Machine so that we can compare it effectively today.
Well, excellent question. So, if one were to go back, let's say, let's go back 40, 50 years. Right?
Okay.
At that point, there's really very few what we would call auto ID systems in the supply chain, which means there's very few ways of automatically identifying almost anything. Well, if you go back far enough, really, some would argue that the greatest technological innovation in supply chains was the shipping container, honestly. But I'm kind of excluding that from this conversation. So just from the standpoint of what you and I think about in terms of technology itself, I think an argument could be made that really your ubiquitous UPC barcodes, your universal product code. There's nothing universal about them, by the way, but your UPC barcodes were really kind of the first serious attempts to integrate any kind of data capture in supply chains. Really, the idea being you could identify an item as to what it was without laying eyes on the actual item form factor itself.
So within the barcode, you could scan it and get data detail on the item within that package that you needed to make decisions.
Essentially, in its most simplest form, essentially, yes. But the UPC, your traditional barcode, had a lot of limitations, starting with the fact that really all you could tell was, what SKU it was, what stock keeping unit it was, and who made it. That was basically it. And we've kind of gone from that to more extensive, 2D barcodes and, serialized barcodes and things like that, that, organizations like GS1 have promoted over the years, really with the goal of item level identification, not just SKU level, but identifying individual items within a stock keeping unit. That has then morphed into, auto identification, auto IDing of items and things without a need for a line of sight. Which means you don't actually need to visually see it, which is kind of where our friend, RFID comes in, or radio frequency identification. And from that, we've now evolved into more sophisticated applications of the data that we are able to capture through many of these kinds of technologies. Because earlier, really the idea was, you were collecting data, but what do you do with it?
Right.
And artificial intelligence is that next iteration that is looking to make sense of all this data that we are collecting, not just from auto ID systems, but from all sorts of various applications. I just use auto ID as an example.
Yeah. So how is artificial intelligence collecting the data? So I understand the difference between line of sight, which is what a barcode was, to RFID, where there are readers around the, let's say, the manufacturing facility or the store or the logistics hub that's collecting the information on what enters and exits the door. Still, at some point, the information has to be collected. How is artificial intelligence doing that? Is it continuing to collect it the same way? It's just calculating, using the data it gathers differently?
Well, so that's a really good question. So think about, let me give you probably the simplest example.
Yeah.
So think about when you're on a YouTube or Netflix, right? So based on the first 5 or 6 things that you've watched, it will be able to then tweak or develop a profile of what you like to watch and suggest you other things. And meanwhile, if you click on them, it is collecting that additional data about what you like to watch. But equally importantly, if you don't click on it, it is also collecting that data. And so in the process of your actions, it's call it getting smarter, or just call it collecting more information and developing a better profile, and really kind of getting to the ultimate holy grail of what we call general intelligence, which is kind of this ability to solve arbitrary problems. In this case, the arbitrary problem is a recommendation system, but it could be almost anything. So AI, it's collecting data, it's using data, but also collecting data at the same time. So that's kind of probably the simplest example that I could give you. Most people, when they think of AI, especially today, the flavor of the season are the chat GPTs of the world, right?
Yeah.
And that's what everybody's heard of. But that's really what we call a generative AI or generative artificial intelligence. Really, the idea there is that the AI itself is creating something entirely new that didn't exist.
Generative.
Right? So generative AI, essentially being, imagine for a minute, you said, generative AI, the closest example I could give is if you had a really creative friend that you were hanging out with.
Yeah.
And so I play this game with my kids sometimes where we're driving in the car and I'll make up a sentence saying, so we were walking down a forest, right? And my kids will just add on more and more stuff at the end of that. And we saw a bear and the bear did this and that and the other.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, the opposite of that is traditional or weak AI, where you're not necessarily generating anything new, but you're just using the AI to analyze data and make prescriptions. That's really the AI that we are seeing applications of in manufacturing.
Let's pick that up when we come back from break. And before break, I want to talk to you a little bit about First Horizon's Bucket Listening podcast. It's targeted for the business and commercial owners, C-suite people, about how to bring your bucket list into action well before retirement. Why not live your bucket list and use a banker from First Horizon to help you do it? You can find it on any of your favorite podcast sites. Again, look for Bucket Listening on your favorite podcast site and hear these remarkable stories. We'll be back right after this break with Shashank Rao. We're talking about artificial intelligence and supply chain management and what the future looks like. Be right back. Customer service never goes out of style. In fact, I think it's safe to say that customer service is more valuable and more important now more than ever. Hi, this is Cam Marston. One thing that my over 200 episodes of What's Working has taught me is how important customer service is to building and maintaining a thriving business. It's the growing need for customer service that's led me to partner with one of the state's leading customer service trainers to create our program called Delivering 5-Star Customer Service. Your team will get one 90-minute training session per month for 6 consecutive months. Each session builds on the skills learned the previous month, allowing your customer-facing teams to practice before moving on to the next lesson. And the 6 lessons address everything from appearance to electronic communications to conflict resolution to maintaining a service mindset. Our program travels and is delivered in person at your workplace, nothing virtual. You simply can't practice the level of the skills this course teaches virtually. For more information, email me, cam@cammarston.com, and let's schedule a time to talk. Remember, you have less to fear from outside competition than you do from discourtesy and bad service from inside your own company. Again, email me, cam@cammarston.com, and let's talk about your business. Shashank Rao is on the other side of a Zoom call from me from his office in Auburn, Alabama, at the Harbert School of Business at Auburn University, where he is a professor in the Department of Supply Chain Management. He's authored many different articles that I see listed here, and one of them in this magazine, this journal called the International Journal of Physical Distribution and Logistics Management. And I imagine that one flies off the shelf wherever it goes. It sounds like an intriguing and absolutely riveting magazine. I'm being somewhat facetious here. Shashank, what does this artificial intelligence impacting supply chain going to look like to me? What am I going to see as a result of this? Will there be anything?
Well, that's a really good question. So let's think about some of the most prominent changes in the way people buy and shop for things in the past. That has happened in the past, maybe 5 to 10 years, right?
Okay.
Many people would argue BOPIS is probably one of the biggest changes that we've seen in the way people interact with sellers or interact with their retail store, buy online, pick up in store, right?
Yep.
And now the even going back 5 or 6 years ago, when retailers started experimenting with BOPIS, there were a lot of questions being asked about things like cross shopping, which was, you go into the store to buy things on your grocery list, but you end up buying a bunch of other things in some cases that may not have been on that list. And how is BOPIS going to be able to support that? Because that unplanned purchases, for example, used to be a substantial revenue driver for businesses. And when BOPIS started first making its appearance, that was a big question as to how BOPIS was going to be supporting, things like unplanned purchases, etc. But just going back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago about, being able to make predictions about what people like and what people are likely to buy, etc. The whole idea behind weak AI or narrow AI or non-generative AI that we were talking about, that's really kind of where we see most applications in manufacturing and supply chain contexts. And so think about the last time if you ever used, the Walmart app to pick up to order your groceries or something like that, right? The app is now able to make suggestions to your if you have the Amazon app or what have you on your device. Now the app is able to make suggestions to you about things that it thinks you may be interested in, which even you didn't know you were interested in.
Right.
And
it's true.
And so these are all examples of how the end user is going to interact with the outcome of AI. I don't know that end users are going to end up interacting with the algorithms themselves. What they're going to end up interacting with are the outcomes of things like this. Another prime example that you can think of is QC, quality control, right? Or let's talk inventory, IRI, inventory record inaccuracy. So IRI has traditionally been a massive problem in supply chain and retail operations. With businesses oftentimes being themselves unaware of the inventories they have. And oftentimes in the process, they kind of create workarounds on either having excessive buffer stock, for example, or potentially creating fudge factors in terms of their inventory. So if you don't have 5 or something, don't show it at all.
Right.
Things like that. AI allows much smoother or much less friction in terms of how some of these activities can be performed in a business. So image processing, for example, the automated image processing allows firms at this point to have much more accurate estimates of on-hand inventory and on-shelf stock and on-shelf availability, which means from an end user standpoint, if you were to go to the store, your likelihood of finding the right count of something when a store says they have that count is going to be a lot higher with automated image processing.
So what are you doing, Shashank? What are you getting your hands on in order to help the companies that you've helped? I see your list of clients includes Target, Aptar Pharma, Mercurygate, Tempur, Sealy International, the mattress company, U.S. Department of Labor. What are you doing when they call and say, hey, I need your help?
So typically, we go in and help with, many of these issues. We work with businesses on, issues involving auto ID that I spoke about earlier, image recognition. But a big one that we also work on is helping them with QC and defect detection. And so traditionally going back, quality control and the defect detection in product has been a very manual, very labor-intensive process where items are inspected by hand, oftentimes. And human beings in general are really bad at doing repetitive tasks. Humans have the tendency to get bored easily, to get tired easily, And in general, repetition causes a fake sense of familiarity, which can then lead to challenging consequences, sometimes disastrous consequences. So some of the things we do with businesses is we help them automate their QC, their quality control, their defect detection systems, and so on. In the general context of AI, trying to take that human element out. It's not just about cost reduction, although cost reduction is a part of it, but really it's about enhancing the end product and the end outcome.
Can you give me an example?
So, well, okay. So, good question. So let's think about let's think about this project that we did some time back with auto injectables, right? So one of the challenges that you have with just self-medication in general, where patients are required to monitor their own medication from time to time, is this whole idea of adherence. Whether they follow through on the whole course of the drug, whether they take it when they're supposed to be taking it, and so on. Because oftentimes what you'll find is adherence is actually pretty okay when patients are feeling bad. But once they start feeling a little bit better, it does tend to drop off.
Yeah. Shashank, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you there. We're going to go to break, and I want to hear this example when we come back from the break. I'm on the line with Shashank Rao. He is a John Thompson Professor at the Department of Supply Chain Management at Auburn University, the Harbert School of Business. We're talking about AI and supply chain, and he's in the midst of giving me an example of how it all works. Actually, before we go to break, let's hold on one little bit. I want to give everybody a sense of some of the upcoming shows, and now would be a good time for it. Next week, we have Joe Calloway. Joe is an author and a speaker, and he's been a colleague of mine on the speaking circuit for years. He posts some things on LinkedIn that always catch my attention. Very thoughtful, pro-business thinking stuff. And the one that I liked most recently, which made me reach out to Joe and say, hey, would you be on the show? Just was a coffee cup with the word begin on the side. And begin your day, begin the project, begin the exercise, whatever it may be. Joe is a consultant to many of the great companies, and he's going to spend some time with us next week. Following that, I have Brent Barkin on the show. Brent has been on the show a couple of times. His family was the shoe station business. They sold to Shoe Carnival not long ago. And Brent has finally found another path after that sale. He wanted to know what he was going to do. He had the opportunity to reboot. I'm very curious of how he went through that process. It'll be a good story for all of us. Anyway, that's what's upcoming. We'll now go to break, and we'll be right back.
This is Seth Cherniak, Vice President of Branch Development for the Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group. If you're an experienced financial advisor wanting the freedom of independence but aren't sure making that jump is right for you, we should talk. Jeffrey Matthews has developed a successful program for advisors who don't want to be 1099 contractors and don't want to pay for their own overhead. We're looking for advisors who want the freedom to run their business the way they see fit with the support that comes with a W-2 firm. If you're interested in joining one of our branches, or if you want to open your own branch as a full-time employee, let's chat. Our compensation plan is one of the most competitive among all W-2 firms, big or small. Reach out to us today at jeffreymatthews.com, connect with me, Seth Cherniak, on LinkedIn, or click the link in the podcast.
Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group, member FINRA, SIPC. Shashank corrected me during the break. It's the Jim Thompson Professor at the Department of Supply Chain Management at the Harbert School of Business, Auburn University. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. Shashank Rao is on the other side of a Zoom call from me. We were discussing, Shashank, prior to the break, an example of how this artificial intelligence content, sophistication that you work with, works in real life. And you had begun telling us about an auto-injectable. And when people essentially giving themselves medicine, and when they begin feeling good, their proclivity to continue drops. Pick it up from there.
So this was a pilot project that was kind of implemented on a limited scale, but really what the study did was it asked people to with their smartphone take a picture of when they were injecting themselves and just upload it onto an app that was created specifically for this purpose. Now, this wasn't like a lab study. It wasn't something that we cooked up or that we just did in the college. This was something that, that the company did, and we kind of just helped them with planning it and analyzing the data for it, etc. And we were able to identify with a fair level of accuracy the patients that we felt were likely to fall off.
Interesting.
Once they started feeling a little bit better, just based on the way they were injecting themselves. So patients who kind of had certain tendencies to inject themselves in ways or through shortcuts or workarounds were usually more likely to fall off once they started feeling a little bit better. And so this is something that ultimately we ended up writing a program for that was able to that could then make this determination without human intervention.
Let me repeat that. This is fascinating to me. So the patient would inject themselves, they'd take a photograph, they'd upload the photograph to the app that was created for this very specific purpose. And through the use of artificial intelligence, you could determine who was taking shortcuts, who was slacking off, who wasn't doing it with rigor, and make fairly accurate predictions of who would stop giving themselves this injection when they started feeling better.
Exactly.
And that is without your eyeballs scanning each photograph. The AI could scan the photograph.
Well, initially there is a need for human intervention, and initially you kind of need to train the system.
Yes.
But once the system is trained enough, it can make those judgments by itself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. So what happened next? You said you were able to say to the manufacturer, here's who we think are going to stop using it. What is the step to getting them to use it? Is that something you had a part in?
No, that's really not something that we get involved in, from a business standpoint, because that really kind of gets more into like pharmaceuticals and things like that. Our goal is really kind of creating the systems that support this sort of decision making.
Yeah.
And once the decision making, so we create the decision support systems. We don't typically, from a business standpoint, get involved in the decisions that follow the use of the DSS. If that makes sense.
The remedy. You don't get involved in the remedy. You help diagnose the problem.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So that's typically what most data scientists and what most business business consultants like us would typically, or business professors like us would get involved with. So that's typically the extent of our involvement.
Yeah. What are your students working on, Shashank? What do you have them? You teach classes there. What do you have them doing?
So it's interesting that you bring it up. Just about 30 minutes before we started talking, I had a student group come in on a project that they were working on. It's actually a really interesting project. This is data from a real company that I worked with, a while back. And so they had items that they were selling on their webpage. And it's a situation that many of you may have found yourselves in as well. Cam, I'm sure you experienced this too. If you go online, you may sometimes see that there is a scarcity message being flashed saying, hey, there's only 3 in stock or only 2 in stock, what have you, only X in stock, right? And sometimes you don't see anything, right? You don't see a message of that kind. Many sellers typically, will have some sort of a flag that goes up when the inventory level gets below a certain amount. It usually is 10, but it could be anything. And so this study that we had got involved in had looked at what were the consequences of a buyer seeing these kinds of scarcity messaging at the time of purchase. And so one of the things that one of the student teams identified was if buyers see these scarcity messages at the time of purchase, they're much more likely to return the item. So it's interesting. Intuitively, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But then if you go back, it's what marketers call the scarcity heuristic. The idea being if you think something is scarce, you make a rash decision about it at the time of purchase. But then you have time to think at leisure once you bought it and you realize you did something stupid.
Oh, no kidding.
And so you turn around and you're more likely to return it. It's kind of the equivalent of if you were to shop for a ticket on Priceline. If it only says there's 2 remaining at this price, you'd probably just buy it right away. But if it didn't say anything, you'd probably say, I'll come back tomorrow and look at it.
So the scarcity makes the purchaser rush to the purchase, thinking they'll lose it, but they get buyer's remorse for having rushed.
Exactly. So that's what we're identifying. Yes.
And what are you doing with the results of that study?
It's actually pretty striking. I'll come to that in a minute. It's actually pretty striking. The scarcity implications also seem to go in pairs of 2. So there is very little difference between 10 and 9 items in stock, but it's almost like a ladder function that the return rate increases substantially when you get to 8. 8 and 7 behave similarly. 6 and 5 behave similarly. 4 and 3 behave similarly. 2 is substantially higher, and 1 is completely crazy off the charts because you're at a 37% return rate once you only have 1 item in stock.
Fantastic. This is so interesting to me. So what do you do with the content? You go to, I'm familiar with Amazon, typically has these only blank left in stock things. What do you do with the content? Is your advice to the business owner, manager to, hey, don't put that up. You increase the risk of returning the items if you put limited quantities available.
So that's exactly. So that's one of the things that's coming out of this study about, whether it is meaningful to even put that scarcity messaging on such sale items, but there's other insights that we're providing as well.
Yeah, I love it. How interesting. We're coming to the end of segment 4 here, Shashank, and it's typically the time where we try to get to know the guest a little bit, and I have not allowed you to introduce yourself. So I've got a quick list of questions here that I think we'll get in a couple before we go to break here. Which generation do you enjoy working with the most? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I think such an interesting question you asked. I think the greatest joy in what we do in this business is that we can help young people achieve their dreams.
So many people have said that.
And I think, it genuinely is heartening to, see these young 18 and 20-year-olds that come into the program and, they come in as kids and they graduate as young men and women.
Yeah.
So I genuinely enjoy working with our undergraduates who typically are the 18 to 22-year-olds, but then also our doctoral students, because at that point, you're training colleagues. You're not training students anymore. You're training people who will be with you for 10, 15, 20 years as colleagues in the academy.
Shashank Rao is my guest today. He's the Jim Thompson Professor at the Department of Supply Chain Management, Harbert School of Business, Auburn University. Shashank, thank you so much. I'm going to put a link to your bio and how to find you for any guests that want to track you down for their own needs. Sound good?
Excellent, Cam. Thank you very much.
I'll put them in the show notes. Thank you very much. We'll be right back after this break with segment 5. Do you have an industrial or commercial construction project you're ready to make a reality? Persons Services Corp is a diverse specialty contractor capable of tackling complex projects. They've won awards from Engineering News Record and the Association of General Contractors. If you're looking for a turnkey project management solution, advanced technologies, and skilled personnel you can trust, look no further than Persons Services Corp. Find out more at personsservices.com. Special thanks to Shashank for giving me the time that he did to discuss that. I think it's both absolutely amazing and frightening at the same time that there are ways to study how you and I make buying decisions, even when the website says only a few left. Whereas I think there's something about human nature there that I'm sure it's tracked throughout all the ages and all the Greek philosophers and everything, that what he's finding in this study about urgency has probably been taught to us many different ways before in many different languages, but and many different philosophies. But essentially, when you rush, you regret it. When you hurry and you make a quick decision, you regret it. The return rates, I think is what he said, for when inventory reads one item remaining is over 30%. So if you sell online and are feeling like you're increasing purchase power, let me think if that's the right way to say it, by telling the customers that there's a limited quantity available, if you think you're increasing their interest in buying, you might be, but you're also increasing the incidence of returns from those products because the customer rushes to make a decision, ultimately gets buyer's remorse after realizing that they had rushed and maybe they don't need it or they don't need that one. And like he said, when with the medications, they're there to determine what the problem is and how to ID the problem. And the resolution, the solution, the remedy is on you and me. So he turns that back over. Again, if you want to reach out to him, you will find his contact information in the podcast version of this show in the show notes. You might say, hey, I got a study for you. I can't seem to figure this out. And you can reach out to him and pitch it and see if he can't get some of his students to delve in on that and deliver some results from you. You can find the podcast version at whatsworkingcam.com, where you can email me directly. You can also scroll through and search previous episodes. You'll also find this podcast at all the major podcast sites. If you're a podcast fan, you should be able to enter my name and find this show, where you'll find the link to Shashank as well as all the show sponsors with, I'm happy to say, I think we got more coming on here fairly soon. I'm not sure if I've welcomed listeners in Dothan, Alabama yet, but we've been recently picked up in Dothan, and I'm excited to allow the show to get some traction in that corner of our state, which has been overlooked by this show thus far. Eager to get them involved. So reach out to me, Cam, C-A-M, at cammarston.com. Let me know if you've got a show idea, a guest that I need to interview. Let me know if you have a question for a previous guest, and we'll try to get them back on to answer those questions. You can find me all over social media as much as I can be. My preferred market is Facebook, which is reflective of my age, I think. I do not tick, I do not talk, but you can find me there as well. Do some Twitter from time to time. And so search for me on social media. You might have to add the numeral 1 after my name. Some other loser out there has my name in some of the social media domains and won't give it back, though he doesn't use it anymore. Maybe that's a show in itself. Anyway, you're listening to What's Working. Again, thanks to Shashank. We'll have another show next week. Have a good week, everybody. Thanks for listening. As you likely know, this show originates as a radio show broadcast across the state of Alabama, and it continues to grow in both radio listeners and market. After it's formatted for radio, we then turn it into this podcast. Please share it with those you think would find it interesting, and subscribe to the podcast on my YouTube page, where you can leave messages and your thoughts and your comments, and I'll certainly get back in touch. Finally, if you're a fan of the show, please offer a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can find my book called What Works on Amazon.com. In it, I highlight the top 10 ideas from the first 200 episodes of the show. Mind you, they're not the top 10 best episodes, they're the top 10 best ideas. Many times the same ideas are brought up again and again by different guests, and we dig into those ideas in such a way that they'll be easily applicable for your business. Simply go to Amazon and enter my name, and you'll find What Works as well as my other books. Chapter titles include How to Find a Niche, Innovation, Building Teams, and so forth. To learn more about the workshops and seminars I offer, go to cammarston.com. There you can view clips of my work, view workshop titles, view my reviews, case studies, customer lists. It's all there. If you'd like a free copy of one of the chapters of my book, enter your email address at the bottom of the homepage at cammarston.com. And from that site, you can email me directly. I always love to hear from you. You'll also find me on social media. Find Cam Marston on all the social media platforms, and you may need to enter the numeral 1. There's one other Cam Marston out there, and that numeral 1 distinguishes me from him from time to time. So if you're unsure if it's me or not, enter that numeral 1 after my name, and it should do the trick. On a more personal and less professional side, I record weekly commentaries that air across Alabama on Alabama Public Radio twice each day on Fridays called Keeping It Real. They've won statewide and national awards. They're simple observations on the world as it goes on around me, and they're only a few minutes long. They're a passion. You can find them on the same podcast app you're using to listen to this. Finally, if you're interested in advertising on this podcast or the radio show, reach out. I've worked hard to cultivate a specific listener, and I can tell you all about them, and I have many different options for helping you reach them. Thanks again for listening. We'll have another episode available soon.